We've come to an important point when for the first time we will put the bow to the strings of the violin. It will make a sound, but a very curious, eerie sound, because I don't want whatever finger may be used to press all the way down the fingerboard. If you don't find it easy to find that particular magic spot, you can use the open string. The idea is to use only the balancing requirements in the hand and the carrying of the arm, and to understand the mechanics of the stroke. In fact, we will hold the bow so lightly that we can feel the vibrations of the string in the stick. The bow moves vertically, nearly vertically on the E string and nearly horizontally on the G string. That's their different angles. These are the floating sounds on the vertical plane and the horizontal plane. The mechanics of the stroke involve really two parts, always using the whole arm. In the first part, the upper arm falls away, pulling the bow with it, either on the vertical plane or on the horizontal plane, because otherwise the bow would come forward, bending it if the elbow didn't move. And in the upper part of the bow, the elbow comes forward with a slight rolling of the whole arm into the wrist, like this. We can work on both separately, in this way. And in the upper part of the bow, these two actions connect in the middle of the bow, where they must flow freely and smoothly into each other. If you're very observant, you will see that coming from the lower half of the bow, first the upper arm is involved. It's a fall on the vertical plane, but of course it is a pull away on the horizontal plane. And when we reach this middle point, the forearm begins to fall freely on its own, pulling, as it were, the whole arm, the rotation in the arm and the elbow with it, like that. So that the whole motion would look like that. The opposite happens in the up bow. There, first the forearm reaches the middle, carrying the main burden of its own weight, and at a certain point, this weight is taken over by the upper arm, which into a lifted position. This is the way it would look. We have been carrying the bow, and by now our wrists and fingers are probably warm enough for us to concentrate on them. You will notice that when holding the bow in the natural way, they are built, these joints, to move most readily in a vertical axis. This is a simple waving motion, which must be soft and must go into all the joints. We will apply this to the stroke in uneven groups. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and also in fives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The reason for this is that in that way the wave pattern remains uninterrupted and it continues at the same rhythm. We will do it on two strings in order to accentuate the wave pattern. And in 5, Now, it must be understood that the change of level between the two strings is affected entirely by the change of level of the arm. Because if it were left entirely to the wrist, we would have something like this. The bow going at odd angles. Therefore, it must remain on its own plane. The wave pattern is always on the plane of the particular string it is playing on. Conversely, if the wrist were eliminated from motion, and the motion were done entirely with the forearm as a rigid unit, it would look like this. Which is too rigid for violin playing. We've seen in the wave motion how the pattern was repeated every 2 notes. Now, if we continue with this and play 1 note on each complete pattern, we will get retakes on either the down bow, like that, or the up bow, on the different planes of the different strings. Of course, we must remember in this case that the fingers must hold the bow in a way quite firmly. They must not lose their spot of contact. But on the other hand, of course, there must be sufficient flexibility to allow for the big movements of the arm into the wrist, the knuckles. Two notes. We would have done 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You will see that in this motion, an added motion is required at the end of the stroke, because if we do 1, 2, the up bow having to begin that way, it must be prepared. Therefore, we have to do 1, 2, and 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 1, 2, so on. This would look on the violin as follows. You will notice the extra motion at the end of each stroke. If you watch indulgence in fancy motions and hold the bow properly, using mainly the arm for the motion, this allows us to carry the weight continually. On the other hand, I don't want you to get this pressure without motion. So we will use the same 2 notes, but extend one of them, returning to our swing motion at the end for our change of direction. You will notice that in this figure on 2 strings, we have a pattern of a horizontal 8 lying on its side. It can also lie on the other side. But even when we draw a note on 1 string, there must anything that comes into your head, keep it going. That's the main thing. The bow moves at the same speed. If you use the same length of bow on each note, of course, the shorter notes will be that's a different bow speed, and you must become acquainted with different bow speeds. If you tighten the little notes, they will come. That is a very good exercise. If you leave the first of the little notes out, you will get this pattern. But we must still feel the unspoken, unsung note in that pattern. The hand must be always in continuous motion. And then if we tuck in a few little notes, we get a certain continuous speed and fast notes. At the frog, at this point of the bow, to do that, you must keep the wrist fairly flexible and keep the elbow high enough above the bow so that the wrist can move in a horizontal direction. Otherwise, you will get its vertical sound. You want to get that quality. This brings us to the détaché, one of the basic strokes of violin playing. This is always a drawn stroke. You're drawing the string without crime, a certain abandon. The abandon to the motion that you are studying and that you are cultivating. As soon as you lose that abandon, you will lose the pleasure in playing, and then you had better put your violin down until you can refresh yourself.